Well, hello guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the build of the Skymaster F-14 Tomcat Diamondback scheme aircraft. Forgot there for a second. And we're doing some fun things in this video like always, so stay tuned and we will get back into this build. All right, so with the vertical stabs completed, it's time to start moving forward in this aircraft. Now, we can't move forward until we get this back end sorted out and dealt with. So we've got a few things to deal with here. We've got the Unilite afterburner ring, forgot what they were called. We've got those to sort out, tail cones, pipes, wiring, all that stuff needs to be dealt with before we can start moving forward. So the wiring is the key thing. So really the afterburners need to go in first, and then we deal with the wires coming off of the surfaces, get those run. It kind of works in conjunction with the thrust tubes, but that's the next thing we're working on here. We're also going to start working on the functional tail hook because that's another thing in the back. So we'll probably start with the tail hook and then continue into the wiring and things like that. The tail hook I think will be fairly simple and it'll be just a portion of this video. So let's dive in to the tail hook and the aircraft. All right, so moving into the functional tail hook here. So the first step is going to be gluing this whole assembly together, and we're going to do that first before we move into making the servo mount. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cut out a hatch right here that we can reinstall. So and the servo, we've got a thin wing servo to mount in there. And that's what this MKS HV69 servo is for the functional tail hook. So step number one, we want to get this all high-soled together. We want to have this arm going inside to operate the tail hook. So at least that's what our servo is going to mount to. We may use this one or we may use a different one made of carbon or something, but I'm just going to sort through these details and I'll show you guys once we get this glued together. Pretty straightforward. You just want to make sure when you glue it that it's straight, right? So that's basically the key, is you can't just lay it down like this because this piece sits at an angle. So it's important that this stays straight. So for that reason, I think we're going to leave this all assembled when we glue this together, just so we can make sure that we are nice and straight. Okay, so we're not going to end up using this piece for the tail hook. Reason being is that it's not going to provide enough leverage for this tail hook, or we can do better anyways. This probably would work, but what we want to do is we want to get that pivot point or servo mounting point as high as possible or as far away as possible from the surface. And I think we're going to end up using a clevis. So that also means that we need to have a nice straight line here as well too. So basically we're going to get this all glued together, and then we're going to do a custom horn that comes up like this and gets as high as possible in that pocket. So step number one now is we're going to get this all covered in glue, get it stuck together and let it cure. Okay, so we've put the glue in there. What I did was I put the high sol in the joint and got it all lined up where I needed to. And basically what I was doing was I was visually doing it, but running a straight edge from this little piece here through the screw, through the back of the tail hook, so we can get that nice and straight. But also if you just look down the tail hook, visually you can get it pretty close to. Once I was happy with that, I just wicked some thin CA into the joint here as well too, just to hold it. So now it's actually not pivoting side to side while we're waiting for that high sol to dry. So we're going to let that cure, and then once that's cured, we can move on to getting the servo mounted inside this pod. Check, check. All right, so we're getting things moving on here with the functional tail hook. So what I did was cut out a hatch here. I just used an X-Acto knife and a a ruler to get that cut out, so that worked fine. And so we've got the MKS HV69 servo. We put the clips on the end here, and what I've done is I've just taken some ply, whatever thickness this is, 2 layers of it, glued them together, made the little notch in there, and now what we're going to do is we're going to glue those pieces of ply into the actual tail hook itself. So those are going to get stuck down there. And then while we're here, we probably will put a couple pieces of ply in there as well too, just to have something to screw to when we put that cover plate back on. So that is what we're doing with this setup. Next thing I'm going to do is sand the skin here that we're going to fasten to, because this is pretty slick looking, and we need to get that epoxy biting in there. So we'll give that a bit of a sand, we'll mix up some Hysol and glue that in place. All right, so what I've done here, guys, is I've taken the Dremel and I have sanded out all the extra epoxy in this area so the servo is going to sit as flat as possible. Then I've also taken 1 layer of the ply off of each of these pieces, again, so the servo sits all the way down. We've installed the servo horn, got it centered as well too, and now the servo sits as far down, basically it's sitting against the skin down there, right? So we've maximized the amount of servo horn that we can have. Now this servo horn's a little bit long, so we won't be going in the furthest outside hole, will be 1 in, and that is where we're going to make this work. So this is all good to go. Next thing we need to do is sort out our servo horn and get that kind of dealt with and figured out. So next thing we get to do is figure out the horn that's going to come up and go into this area. So you can see here, just mocking that up, if we were to have used the existing arm here that came with the whole system, it would be too short. It may work, but it doesn't really maximize the straightness of our linkage here. So we want our new horn to be kind of something like that. So it just needs to be longer on the base, basically. So I'm going to work on this and get the horn situation figured out. All right, so I've just taken a piece of carbon here, carbon plate, 1/8" carbon plate, or something close to that, and came up with our servo horn design. So basically what we're doing here is just getting that raised up, right? That was the whole point of doing this. So that's what we're going to end up using. The other thing I forgot to show you guys is I found these little remove before flight tags. I forgot I had these. The only downside is, well, downside for this aircraft is they're from the JR plug-in thing. So anyways, we'll forgive that because we're using Jetty on this aircraft, but pretty much is perfect size-wise for that little clip for the landing gear. So if you're watching my other videos, this is from the landing gear. So now that we've got this figured out, next thing we need to do is we're going to cut that little button off or screw head. We have to sand a slot in the arm, and that's going to receive the carbon piece, and we'll get that glued in place. All right, so we have this all set up. It's pretty much perfect. So I just took my my large disc, and made a slot here in the arm itself. And we've got the carbon horn, which I sanded just a bit of a bevel or an angle on the bottom there, and it fits beautifully in the little spot there. So as far as geometry goes, I think we are going to be really good with this. I'll give you an idea of what we're looking at. So the fully retracted position of the hook is somewhere about there, and then down will be somewhere about there. So we can get a pretty straight line here as far as travel, because we're probably going to use a clevis on this side. The clevis is going to keep that arm pretty straight, and we're going to use a ball joint on this side. And what we're going to do is we're going to hug this arm a little bit to this side of the whole pod, so we've got room for a ball joint to make that all work. So anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up some high sol and get this piece glued in place, and then we have to let that sit and do its thing. But really happy with the way this is turning out. I think it's going to be a great setup. So that's the next big step in this, is more gluing and more waiting. All right, so we've got it sitting in our drill press vise here, and I'll just show you this backside. So you can see that we've hugged the carbon horn to that side. And again, that's just to leave enough room for a ball joint to mount on the one side of the carbon. So we're gonna let that cure. Obviously, we're gonna paint this and everything as well too. We are gonna be painting the tail hook, black, white, like the normal scale setup, just like we did on the F-18, but that is gonna sit there and cure and be awesome. All right, so we've got the tail hook basically all set up here. Just screwed the servo down using the supplied screws. That was pretty straightforward. We've got the clevis on this side, the ball joint on that side. And what I've done here is I've kind of maximized our travel on the downside. So that's as far travel as we can get with that servo horn in that position. Now we do have a little bit of adjustment on the other side. So this side. So we can extend this rod a little bit if needed. So those are going to be final adjustments that we can do once this is mounted on the plane. But what I was doing to kind of roughly get this set up is just put it on the horizontal of my toolbox and then go down like this, so we're not fully retracted, but that gives me kind of a rough idea where we're going. And fully extended is servo travel's maxed out there. So mechanically we'll have to adjust that if we need to make any adjustments. So you can see there I've slowed the servo down to be 3 seconds of movement. So we can change that again as well. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the servo hatch screwed in place. We're going to put a hole up here for the wire to go through. And then once the servo hatch is screwed in place, then we can work on the painting of the tail hook. All right, so we are all covered with the servo cover. I use these little brass screws. So that's done, and I sanded down the high sol a little bit here as well too, just to make a nice smooth transition, and then took the gloss off of the carbon horn that we made. So next thing to do is basically paint this entire hook white. Now the reason we're painting it white is because the scale pictures, it's basically a white hook and it's got black stripes all along it. So it's obviously, you can't paint the black first and then cover it with white because that doesn't work so good. So anyways, going to shoot this white. I'm going to tape a little bit of this off as well too, just to protect this portion of the pod. Okay, so we've got the tail hook painted lighter gray. Now we've got it all masked off and we're going to paint the black. All right, so we've got the tail hook all painted. Our black is done. I did go in and touch up a little bit of the little runs and stuff, as you can see there, but once it's weathered, that will look normal anyways. So obviously the weathering happens once we're done painting the actual tail hook. So what I did now is I just painted the actual hook portion, or the cable catch gunmetal or silver, and that's a fairly accurate representation of the picture that I have that I'm going from. So anyways, so that is done and drying. All right, guys, so we flipped the F-14 fuselage over, and the reason we flipped it over is we want to get the tail hook attached. So the tail hook's pretty straightforward. You've got this little rectangle right here. Now inside the fuselage, we've got a rib that goes all the way down the center portion here. So that's why when you look at the tail hook, there's two little forks or tabs, and they fit on either side of the rib, but we've got a nice outline here as well too for the pod. So that'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So you can see there the forks. So basically those fit in like that. So we do need to create 2 little holes there. We are going to glue this thing in place. We need to come up with a matching hole. And you can see here I put my little servo exit hole on the side of the pod, because if we went in the center, there's a rib in the center. So keep that in mind as well. But that is how our pod mounts on, just like that. So pretty easy to flip this fuselage over at this point, because we are nice and light. There's not a lot of stuff going on this fuselage. One other thing I noticed here is that side gear door looks like it's all finished and fit and everything. This side, not so much. So this side, we still have all these exposed areas. This one hasn't been sanded down yet, so you can see there's a bit of a bump out there, and that's preventing the door from closing all the way, because that is hitting the legs. So we've got a bit of detailing to do on this door, because it doesn't match the other one currently, and obviously it doesn't close all the way, which is not good. So anyways, next step here is we're going to get this pod mounted. We haven't weathered the hook yet, but we're going to do that when the hook's actually installed on the aircraft. So for now, next step is getting that thing installed on the fuse. All right, so we've got our holes made for our front part there. We've got our hole made for our servo lead, and we're ready to install this. So all I'm going to do is take my Dremel, and we are going to sand this area out a little bit so we get good glue adhesive, and we're going to sand this side as well too, and we're going to glue that pod on the fuselage. All right, and you don't need to go too crazy when you do this, but you do need to get rid of the paint. Otherwise, you are not going to get good contact or good holding power with your epoxy. So that's what it looks like when we have sanded both sides. So nice and textured. So now we're gonna mix some epoxy up and get this glued in place. All right, guys, and we are all glued in place, and I think that looks awesome. Once we get a little bit of weathering on that hook, it's gonna look amazing. So this just needs to cure now. We're gonna put a little bit of weight on the top just to help push that down, but it is in the right spot. And all I did here is just visually line it up. There's that outline piece as well too, so just lined it up on the outline, and that's good to go. All right, guys, so with the tail hook all complete, now it's time to start moving into the exhaust cones, the exhaust system, and more importantly, the afterburner lights mounting in the exhaust cones. So we're gonna do this a lot like we did on the F-18. We're going to make a, obviously get the cones mounted, get the lights mounted, but then basically we need a way to plug in those lights and all that kind of stuff. So we need to come up with our mounting system for everything back here. So first step is going to be to cut slots to make sure that we can get those lights in and out. So I'm going to do that first here, and we'll see what I come up with. Okay guys, so I'm going to give you a bit of a rundown here on what we are doing for the whole engine system. So basically you've got 2 engine rails mounted in this aircraft. So you have the permanent mounted one, which is right here, which is close to the outside of the aircraft. Okay, so that's something like this, mounted in there. Then you've got the inner rail right there, which bolts in. So this is one of the inner rails. Okay, so that's the inner rail right there. Now, one thing with the way that SkyMaster has this set up, permanent rail is here, inner rail is shorter, like this. Okay, so permanent rail's here, inner rail is there. So what we're gonna do, these pipes on these SkyMaster kits, they generally plug in to the holes designed for them to plug into. So what we're going to do in this case is, because we've got one of these mounting holes further aft than the other one, is we're going to take those bolts on the bell mouth, and we're going to have one pointing backwards, one pointing forwards. And what that does is one's going to go in this side, one's going to go in this side. That allows us to move that pipe forward and backwards. Yes, it won't be a quick release, which we don't really need, but basically we can put a bolt on that pipe once we get it adjusted, and we can move the position forwards and backwards. Now, why is that important? Well, that's how we're going to get the exhaust cone to work with the afterburner lights. So generally, if you take these exhaust pipes, you move them all the way back, they won't plug into this removable former because now it's sitting back here in the permanent one. So what we can do is when we have the adjustment room available, we can move that pipe forward and backwards, which will expose some of the perimeter around the exhaust cone. So if that pipe comes all the way to the outside of the exhaust cone, it's basically tight all the way around, which honestly I don't really want anyway, so this kind of worked out well on this kit. It's going to be just slightly shy, maybe about 25 millimeters or an inch. And what's going to happen is that afterburner light is just going to glow in this area around here. So we're going to paint the ceramic paint from BVM all on the tip of this exhaust. And that's my idea behind how these exhaust cones are going to work. So all I'm doing right now is kind of just playing around with this and getting things lined up. I'm going to grab an engine and just pop it in there just so we could take a quick look, because the pipes look like they're specific for possibly each side. So if you look at the bolts that come out of the pipe, they're not in the center, they're kind of shifted one side versus the other. All right guys, didn't film any of it, but both rudders are now complete. This is the rudder that we were, sorry, that's the one, the right one, that we were waiting for the servo horn for, and they did show up yesterday, so we were able to get that all completed. And both rudders are done, which is good because now we can work on the wiring portion. And once we get the wiring done, then we can start wrapping up the pipes and everything for the back end of this plane. So this one worked out well as well too. Basically we've got zero play now in that rudder. It was essentially the same thing. One thing I did notice is the position of everything is down lower. So what I mean by that is I ground out the bottom portion of the actual surface like I did the other one, and I actually had to go a little bit deeper into the rudder itself because just the way everything sits. It's definitely not symmetrical between the two, so be aware of that. You know, if you do stuff to one of them here, the other one, although you can do it very similar, it may end up being slightly different. Okay guys, I've been thinking about this for a couple days to find a solution. This is how I deal with things. I don't just, I mean, when I'm dealing with something like this, I don't generally rush into it. I got to give it some thought. So anyways, one of the struggles we have here is in order to get these engines in, and I don't even think a smaller engine would deal with this, this rail needs to come off. And that's why they made the rail removable, because there's just no way you're getting that engine in without that rail coming off. Struggle is, when that rail's back on, we don't have any room to get the pipe mounted. And because we have to mount these pipes a little bit different, how are we going to deal with that? So our solution here is that what I'm probably going to do is bolt the rail to the pipe, put the pipe in through the back end, and that will allow us to deal with all that stuff. So I think that's going to work out just fine. And but before we do anything with those pipes, we need to deal with the wiring on the vertical stabs, because that's just what we need to do. And then we also need to get our air tanks mounted. We're probably going to put them in this back area as well. So that's all stuff we have to deal with before we start mounting engines. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop these vertical stabs off and take a look at the wiring. So I'll get those off and we'll explore further. Okay, so here's our vertical stabs. Now, a couple days ago we had a speed sensor show up, and we were toying with the idea of putting it in the rudder or vertical stab. One of the problems is you don't have access to this leading edge. There's a former piece that goes all the way up, so not a good idea there. And now that we've got that figured out, we can deal with the wiring. So coming out of the right vertical, we've got 5 wires. So we're going to use a 6-wire Ashlock connector. Coming out of this one, we've got 7 wires. So we're going to use the 9-pin ash lock connector. So now that we know that, we just need to figure out where we're going with stuff. So our servo wires, those will need to run all the way forward into the kind of this area, which is where our main hub or box is going to be mounted. Our light wires are probably going to mount somewhere or need to come somewhere in the central area, because we're going to put our light controllers in this central area just so it's a nice central location for all the different connectors, and it's easy to access if you want to change programming and stuff. So that's kind of the thoughts. What I need to do now is just kind of take a look inside where we're going to mount the hole and just kind of do the planning for that stuff, where we're going to route the wires and everything. So I'm going to come up with a game plan and I'll show you guys what we come up with. All right, guys, so working on the vertical stabs here in the wiring. So we've got all of our connectors or our pins crimped on here, and here is our connector that's going on the wing side. So this is the way I always do all of my surfaces. I talk about this quite often, but I'll put the pins on the surface side. So when this is all inserted, all you need to do if you want to test the rudder servo is you just hook up a servo connection to the pins coming out there. You hook it up to your receiver, and you can easily play with the individual surface. Doesn't have to be mounted to the aircraft. So just a little tip for you. And we've got the 9-pin connector here. So we're going to go to the servo connector in the first 3. The white designates my signal, and then we're going to follow a similar pattern with the black and red on the white light and the red light, because this vertical has the 2 lights. So I'm going to get those connected, and one of these will be done. All right, so our connector's all done here. I did put a zip tie right at the base of the connector, and then covered this section with some heat shrink, some 1/2-inch heat shrink. So now when we insert the surface onto the aircraft, that connector will have some nice room to sit in there. Just keep in mind that the servo is quite far away, so we don't really have to worry too much about any of the stuff hitting that servo unless it was really long. But it's not really long in this case. So all I did in this spot right here is wrap some black electrical tape around the wires, just use some CA, and that's a great way for tight areas like this to deal with these wires. And unless you pull really hard enough to break the electrical tape, that's a nice solid way to do it. So now that this side's done, basically we are going to get the connector installed on the fuselage side. So what I've done is I've measured back from the leading pin here, and I've made a mark in this area right there, which is where I want my connector to sit. And you can see it here. So here's the leading edge pin. We'll go back, and that's where my little mark is. So I only need a hole big enough to run the wires through, but I'm going to use a grommet in there or a through fitting as well, and that will ensure that the wires don't get cut by the fuselage, and it's the matching spot to where I want it on the surface. All right, guys, so I'm just working on the fuselage side of this connector, and I have the servo installed, or the servo lead installed there. Okay, so that one's done. And now we'll do the 2 wires for the lights. So all I do in this situation is just take some Powerbox maxi wire and just take out the white wire, because that's the thinner of the 3, the lighter gauge of the 3. And now we'll use these for our light wires. Also works great for like electron gear wires as well too. And now we just need to put the ash lock pins on the connector. So I figured this was a great time in the video to chat about a couple things, and also give a huge shout out to all you guys that have donated to the Shop Build Fund. Life's been pretty crazy lately. If if you've watched the channel or you're a regular subscriber, we're in the process of building a house. We're almost done. Right now I'm standing in the gymnasium of the house. That's where the temporary shop has been. And it's been pretty nuts. And I actually felt a little bad this week because I've been trying to release videos twice a week and wasn't able to do that this week. So I missed out on the Wednesday video. So apologize to you guys for that. I had some people reach out and ask me if everything was okay because they're used to the normal routine of videos, but everything's good. We're just in kind of crunch time right now, and it's pretty nuts right now. So and just didn't have time to edit a video. So, but good time in the video to thank you guys for the shop build donations. Thank you so much for those donations. It's absolutely awesome. Really, really sincerely appreciate the donations, whether they're big or small. And if you don't know what we're doing here at the Lighter Side of RC, we are crowdfunding for the build of a new shop. So some exciting news. We have, when this video airs, I think it's going to be Saturday, we have garage doors, or the big doors, showing up next week, so which is super awesome. So my goal is to get everything that I need to get done for the house in the shop this week, and then we will probably spend some time Sunday evening cleaning things up, or maybe Monday, whatever it works out to be, and probably not the weekend that this video airs, but the weekend after, we will take a day and we'll have a moving day. So if you're local and you're watching this, would love some help, reach out to me if you've got my number, or email me. And basically we need to take all of this stuff that's in our shop here right now and move it out there. So anyways, thank you guys for the donations, truly appreciate it. And let's get back to the connector. Okay, so we have put the grommet in the fuselage there, and we've got all the wiring for those 3 lines done up. They're all marked as well too. Don't forget to mark your lines, that's important. And so now what we'll do is we'll just drop all those in to the grommet. And there we go. Connector is ready to go. So a great way to do this, in my opinion. The Ashlock connectors are awesome because they lock. It's nice and simple, and it's just a great, simple way to do this stuff. And it's also serviceable, nice and easy. You know, if there was ever a problem with this connector, I have had these that are really, really old and the little thing breaks off. You don't really need to replace them, but I have in the past, and all you do is, you know, give yourself a little bit of slack, cut it off, and put a new connector on. You can actually, even easier, you just pop the pins out and put a new connector on. That's another way to do it as well. So anyways, that side is done. We're going to do the exact same thing to the other side, except we are just using a 6-pin connector because we've only got 5 wires. All right, and one of the last things we're going to do here is a bit of a tip time, and generally you'll see most manufacturers will put a nut on the other side of a scenario like this. So basically you've got an Allen bolt going through, or a bolt going through here, and that's what holds the rudder on. But through vibration and driving and shipping, this is a great example because that side, the bolt fell out. So this is something just to always check on your kits, but all you do in this situation, because the actual mount is threaded, all you need to do is put a bolt on that side with a nylon lock nut, and what happens is that whole bolt assembly never falls out, right? So you can still loosen it. You've got plenty of space there to loosen that, that bolt all the way, but the nut doesn't impede the rudder or any surface from coming off. So I'm going to put those on there and put another screw in that side, or another Allen key bolt, and I'll show you guys what it looks like, and it's a pretty simple little fix. So let's classify that as a tip time for this video, and this tip time has been brought to you by Trusty Bent screwdriver. All right, guys, so this was super easy to set up because of our kits from RTL Fasteners. So my metric kit here, we've got all of the different supplies needed for the M3 size. Love these things. There is a discount code available for you guys to use. It is JV30. It's also listed down below, but I'll write it on the screen here. That gets you 30% off your orders of $25 or more. So great value, great savings. And the other cool thing that I got and love from RTL Fasteners is the Pro Hold Allen keys. These are phenomenal from Bondus. So they actually have a little holder device built into the ball end, so you can actually clip your Allen keys on there and get it into tight spaces without it falling off. So super helpful. So basically now, if you look at this, we can loosen this off all the way. There's plenty of thread showing on that other side, so that's really loose. But our nylon lock nut captures that perfectly, so we know our Allen key bolt's never falling out. And then we can just snug that down with our Allen key. So great little fix. All right, guys, and that is going to be everything for this video. Of course, we just focused on the back end of this plane. I don't feel like we accomplished a lot, but we did get quite a few things done, I suppose. So obviously we got the tail hook done. We got a bunch of the wiring finished. So definitely a positive. Next video, we are going to be running all of our wires forward, and after that's done, we can start to get into the afterburner rings, the exhaust cones, the pipe setup, engine install, things like that. So those are the next steps. I thought we would get to some of those things in this video, but we didn't, and that's okay. So hopefully it's getting close to springtime where you guys are at, and your flying season's getting close to starting. Here in Canada, it's kind of a mix still of weather, but our springtime is fast approaching, I hope. So anyways, guys, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below if you have not subscribed to the channel. And that's it. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.